Was pouring my morning coffee when I noticed a brand new family photo hanging in the dining room. My daughter and son-in-law were smiling, holding my grandson, yet I wasn't in the picture at all. Cassian, my son-in-law, chuckled and said, "It's just us three. You're more like extended family now." The words cut deeper than any knife. After 8 years of opening my home, I was suddenly treated like a stranger. But what Cassian didn't know was that I had already secured a notarized copy of every document tied to this house, and when he whispered to my daughter that soon everything would be in his name, I knew the battle had only begun. Do you want to know how an old man fought back when his own family tried to erase him? Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The house has always been more than wood, brick, and paint to me. It was the place I built with my wife when our hands were still strong and steady. The place where my daughter, Marigold, took her first steps across the old oak floors. Now, at 72, a widower, the same walls stand, but they feel different. My daughter and her husband, Cassian, moved in years ago, first out of necessity, then out of habit. 8 years is a long time. Somewhere along the way, my home slipped through my fingers, becoming theirs in everything but deed. It started with small things. The framed photo of my wife and me, once centered above the fireplace, was nudged aside for a modern painting Marigold said brightened the room. The armchair that had shaped to my frame over decades was shoved into the corner to make space for their sleeker sofa. I told myself it was nothing, just the natural shuffle of generations. But a man notices when the rhythm of his own home changes, when his footsteps echo differently in hallways that used to answer back with warmth. Cassian had a way of speaking like he owned the air in the room. One evening, while I tried to read in the living room, he clapped his hands and said, "We're setting new house rules." My head lifted from the book, surprised by his phrasing. Rules. In my house. He rattled off a list like a manager talking to staff. Meals at fixed times. No noise after 9. And the living room reserved for family time unless invited. I sat there, staring at him, wondering if he realized I had built these walls long before his voice ever filled them. But I swallowed it, kept my lips pressed tight, and nodded as though I were a guest grateful for hospitality. It didn't stop there. Marigold's words cut sharper than any of Cassian's rules. One afternoon, Rowan fussed in his crib, and my arms instinctively reached out. "Dad, no," Marigold said gently, stepping between us. "You're too shaky. I don't want him to get hurt." She didn't mean it cruelly. I know that. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic, but it landed heavy. My own daughter, the baby I once carried against my chest, now telling me I wasn't steady enough to hold her child. A sting spread in my chest, not anger, not quite heartbreak, something in between, something I hadn't felt since the day my wife's hand slipped from mine in the hospital. That night, I sat on the porch. The boards creaked beneath me the way they always had, familiar and worn, one of the few things that still belonged only to me. Fireflies blinked out in the yard, and the mountains beyond stood silent, steady, the way I once was. Through the porch screen, I saw Cassian cradling Rowan with ease, grinning like he was king of the castle. He looked out the window at me, not a glare exactly, but a smug tilt of the chin that told me where I stood in this household, on the edges, unnecessary. Then I heard it. His voice, low but sharp enough to pierce through the glass. "Don't worry," he whispered to Marigold. "Once the paperwork's done, he won't stand in our way." The words hit harder than any insult. Paperwork. My chest tightened, heart pounding as if it wanted to climb out and warn me of something already slipping beyond my control. The word paperwork haunted me through the night. It threaded itself into my dreams, twisting them into restless fragments until dawn crept over the blue ridge outside my window. By morning, it wasn't just a word anymore. It was a weight pressing on my chest, a warning that something inside these walls was slipping out of my hands. At breakfast, the sound of Marigold's laughter spilled from the kitchen, high and easy, mingling with Cassian's deeper chuckle. The two of them sat close together, their son gurgling happily in his high chair. I poured myself coffee, the scrape of the chair legs against the floor sounding louder than it should have. No one looked up. My presence barely shifted the air in the room. That's when I noticed the new frame on the sideboard. A photograph. Bright, crisp, smiling. Marigold, Cassian, and Rowan, captured in perfect symmetry. My chair at the table was reflected in the glass behind them. Empty, like I wasn't even there. Nice picture, I muttered, hoping someone would turn, would invite me in with a word. Cassian glanced up between bites of toast, his voice casual. Just us three. Makes sense, doesn't it? You're more like extended family now. Extended family. The words slipped under my skin like cold needles. Marigold's eyes flicked to me, then away again. Her lips parted as if she might say something, but she pressed them closed and busied herself with Rowan's spoon. Silence from her hurt more than any jab Cassian could deliver. I sat back. The clink of my fork against the plate the only sound I made, swallowing not just my breakfast but the bitter taste of being erased from the very picture of my own bloodline. By afternoon, the house had grown quiet. I was in the den, tracing my finger along the spines of old books, when a knock rattled the front door. A delivery man stood there, clipboard in hand. Cassian swept in quickly, signing something before I could ask. "Yeah," I heard him say with an easy grin. "I rent here. Landlord's an old man. Not much trouble." The words fell like stones in my gut. Landlord. 8 years ago. I had opened this house to them, not as tenants, but as family. I had carved the beams of this home with my own hands, planted the oak in the yard with Marigold balanced on my shoulders. Now I was nothing more than a footnote, a property owner fading into irrelevance. I shut myself in my study, running a hand over the oak desk my late wife had insisted we buy, back when every corner of this place was filled with life and love. The scent of old paper rose from the drawers, mingling with the faint perfume of memories I tried not to chase too far. The walls that once echoed with laughter now pressed inward, strangers' voices reshaping them. Evening brought no peace. From my chair in the hallway, I caught Cassian's voice again, low and amused, carrying through the thin wall. "Don't worry," he said into the phone. "Everything will be official soon. By the end of the month, it'll all be in my name." The armrest beneath my grip creaked as my knuckles tightened. For once, the tremor in my hands wasn't age, it was fury. The paperwork wasn't just some idle comment, it was real, and it was coming for me, for everything I had built. The morning light barely crept through the curtains when the thought hit me again. Cassian's words about renting echoed like a splinter. I pushed myself out of bed and went straight to my study. That room had always been my sanctuary, a place where papers, photographs, and pieces of my late wife's handwriting still lived. But the moment I reached for the drawer where I kept important documents, my breath caught. The old brass lock was gone. In its place sat a new silver one. My keys, the same ones I'd used for decades, no longer fit. The cold metal mocked me. For the first time, I wasn't just suspicious. I was shut out. The room that had always held the heartbeat of this house suddenly felt foreign. My own home no longer open to me. At breakfast, I stirred my coffee longer than necessary, watching the cream swirl as if it could distract me. I finally asked, as evenly as I could manage, "Marigold, did you know about the new locks on my study?" Her fork froze mid-air. A nervous blink. Then she glanced toward Cassian before setting the fork down. "Cassian just thought, with Rowan here, we should have more security." Her voice cracked on the word security. My daughter couldn't meet my eyes. That hurt worse than the lock itself. She knew something, and she chose silence. Watching her shrink into that silence was like watching her walk away from me in slow motion. By afternoon, the mail truck rattled up the gravel drive. I fetched the pile, sorting through envelopes, until one caught my attention, the electric bill. My name was gone. In its place, Cassian Hall. My hand trembled as I tore it open. Every detail I'd managed for decades, gone, reassigned without my consent. Cassian strolled into the kitchen just as I stood with the paper in hand. He flashed that careless grin. Oh, that. Don't worry. I'm just handling things now. It's easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. The words cut deep. I remembered sitting at this very kitchen table with my late wife, our hands ink-stained as we signed mortgage papers. We laughed about how the bank officer looked nervous dealing with 2 kids so young, barely making ends meet. That was the start of this home, the walls we built with our sweat, the foundation of every holiday and family meal. Now, with a single envelope, it was as if I had been erased. The evening settled heavy around the house. Cassian left for one of his late-night errands, and Marigold busied herself upstairs with Rowan. I slipped quietly into my study. The drawer I couldn't open earlier now sat ajar, papers shoved around carelessly. My heart pounded as I knelt and sifted through them. Marriage certificate. There. Old bank receipts. There. But one folder was gone, the one with property deeds. Then I saw it. A scrap of paper half tucked under the desk blotter. Cassian's handwriting, rushed and sloppy. Transfer draft, ready soon. My mouth went dry. There it was. The proof I had dreaded. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't just in my head. They were preparing to take my house. The last piece of my wife I still held on to. Cassian's carelessness had betrayed him. But the cost of that discovery settled like fire in my chest. The locks weren't just on drawers. They were closing around me, one by one. Dinner that night felt like a battlefield before a single word was spoken. The clinking of cutlery and the faint hum of the overhead light seemed louder than usual, filling the silence I carried inside me. I sat at the end of the table, where I had always sat, my eyes watching Cassian more than my plate. He smiled too easily, leaned back in his chair as though the walls, the roof, the very boards beneath us already belonged to him. He cleared his throat, cutting into the quiet. "We need to talk about routines," he said, in that firm, managerial voice of his. "The way this house runs, meal times, chores, even how we use the living room, it all needs a little adjustment." Fork halfway to my mouth. I let the words settle. Adjustment. My house. And yet it was his schedule being laid out like commandments. I swallowed hard, not from hunger, but from the sour taste of surrender. Earlier that afternoon, I had prepared a meal that meant something to me, a Sunday tradition, though it was only Thursday. Fried chicken the way Eleanor, my late wife, always made it. Collard greens. Cornbread warm enough to melt butter in seconds. It was a taste of memory, of family stitched together by food and care. I wanted Marigold to feel it, Rowan to grow up knowing it, Cassian to understand it. But when the plates hit the table, Cassian wrinkled his nose. "Too greasy," he said, shaking his head. "Too old-fashioned. We don't need this anymore." His words cut deeper than the sharpest knife. Marigold glanced at him, then back at me. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might defend the food her mother had made 100 times with love. Instead, she nodded softly. "Maybe we should eat lighter, Dad," she whispered, her eyes sliding away from mine. Silence burned in my throat. I pushed the cornbread aside, its golden crust cracking beneath my fingers. The meal that once filled this house with laughter now lay dismissed, unwanted. The evening brought company. Marigold's cousin dropped by with her husband, chatter filling the dining room as drinks were poured. Cassian played host with a grin stretched wide, slapping backs, telling jokes. I sat quietly, watching my grandson's toy roll across the floor, the sound of plastic wheels against wood echoing in my chest. When the cousin asked for tea, I reached for the pot. My hand, tired from years of labor, trembled as I poured. The cup rattled against the saucer. Cassian's laugh rang out sharp. "See," he said, pointing. "That's why we can't let him hold the baby." The room froze. A chuckle escaped one of the guests, nervous but real. Heat rose in my face as if the spotlight had swung onto me. In that moment, I wasn't Thaddeus Wren, builder of this home, provider, father, grandfather. I was a shaky old man to be pitied, mocked, dismissed. I set the pot down harder than intended, the sound startling enough to silence the table. I looked at Marigold, waiting, begging without words for her to say something, anything. But she lowered her eyes, folding her napkin instead. Her silence was louder than Cassian's laughter. After the guests left, the air hung heavy. I lingered by the sink, rinsing plates with hands that no longer shook but ached with rage. Marigold busied herself with Rowan upstairs, avoiding me as though my disappointment might spill over onto her. Cassian leaned against the counter, arms crossed, that smirk curling on his lips. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Better get used to it. Things are changing." The words carried no threat, no raised voice, yet they struck like a hammer. My jaw locked. I had been silent long enough. The house was shifting under my feet, and if I didn't plant myself firmly, I'd be swept aside like yesterday's meal. Cassian's words echoed like a verdict. "Better get used to it." My jaw tightened. I knew I wouldn't stay silent much longer. The morning sun slid through the blinds in thin strips, casting lines across the kitchen floor. For once, I was up before anyone else, standing in the quiet, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. There was a steadiness inside me I hadn't felt in years. Enough was enough. The memory of Cassian's smirk at dinner still burned, his words ringing like a sentence I refused to serve. I laid out plates on the table, the way my wife used to, coffee at one end, toast stacked neatly in the middle, eggs sizzling on the stove. Every small action carried weight, a declaration that I still belonged here, that this was my home, and not just a roof I happened to share. Cassian's footsteps broke the silence. He entered the kitchen with his usual swagger, glancing at the table as though inspecting a stage he hadn't approved. "You're up early," he said, a faint edge to his voice. "But you didn't need to do all this. I usually handle breakfast." I straightened, spatula in hand. "Not today." His smile tightened. "You've got the chairs set wrong, and eggs that run like that. Not safe for the baby. You know, it'd be easier if you just let me." "Cassian," I cut in, my voice sharper than I intended. "This is my kitchen, my house. You don't get to tell me how to fry an egg under my own roof." The words hung heavy in the air. For the first time, I hadn't swallowed them back. Marigold entered then, her eyes moving nervously between us. "What's going on?" she asked, voice hushed as though Rowan might wake at the sound. "Your father thinks he runs this place," Cassian snapped, still clinging to control like it's the 70s. It's pathetic. I set the spatula down with a deliberate clink. Clinging? I built this home with my wife's hands beside mine. Every nail, every bill, every memory is here because of us. This isn't clinging. Cassian, it's called living in my own house. The air grew taut. Marigold's lips parted, but no defense came. Instead, Rowan's cry from upstairs sliced through the tension like glass. The baby's wail rose, underscoring the silence that followed. Cassian sneered. "See? Even the kid knows it's chaos when you try to take charge." My chest ached, but not from weakness. Years of silence had fattened his arrogance, and I saw it now clearer than ever. I had let things slide, thinking patience was the noble path. But patience had only built his confidence to trample me. I leaned forward, palms slamming against the table so the plates rattled. "No more. I won't sit here another day and swallow your insults. I won't be mocked in my own home. From this moment, you will show me respect, or you won't stay here at all." The words struck like a hammer. Marigold's face drained of color, torn between husband and father. Cassian pushed back his chair with a screech against the floor. "You think you can threaten me? Old man, you're already finished. Just wait." His voice was low, laced with venom. He stormed toward the back door, muttering curses under his breath. I stood there, chest heaving, the baby's cries still echoing upstairs. My hands trembled, but not from age, from fury that had finally found its voice. Through the thin wall, I caught the muffled sound of Cassian's voice. He was on the phone already, his tone colder than before. "Don't worry," he whispered, a sinister calm beneath his words. "He won't see what's coming." The coffee on the table had gone cold. but the fire in my chest only burned hotter. The late afternoon light spilled across the porch when I heard the creak of the mailbox lid. A small stack of envelopes rested inside. Nothing unusual at first glance: utility flyers, a grocery coupon booklet, the usual junk. But one envelope bore the bank's familiar blue insignia. My stomach sank as I tore it open with a thumb that suddenly felt heavy. Inside was a set of documents stamped with bold black ink, mortgage transfer papers. My eyes darted across the lines. The house listed was mine. The owner's name was mine. The signature at the bottom, supposedly mine, curled in a style I'd never written in my life. A sharp tremor rattled through my chest. Doubt clawed at me. I had never signed these. My breath slowed, ragged and shallow, as if the paper itself had stolen the air from the room. I carried the papers inside, each step echoing on the hardwood floor. The study door creaked as I pushed it open. The place that once felt like my safe haven. I spread the pages across the desk and compared the scrawl with my own notes. The grocery lists I had left in the margins of an old calendar, the loops of the letters, the way the T in my name stretched unnaturally. It wasn't my hand. I remembered last week, catching Cassian standing too long by this very desk. At the time, he claimed he was looking for stamps. Now that memory struck like a knife. The horror was real. Someone had forged my name. I picked up the phone with a trembling grip, dialing the bank. A clerk answered, cheerful at first. Then her tone sharpened as I explained. "These forms were submitted under your account, sir. They were processed with supporting documents." My voice cracked, but I steadied it. "I didn't authorize any transfer. Do you hear me? That is not my signature." There was a pause, a shuffle of papers. "It appears someone presented additional authority, a power of attorney. Maybe. The name Cassian Wells appears connected to the file." The room spun. Betrayal had a name, and it was spoken through the receiver like a sentence passed. I hung up slowly, pressing my palm against the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This was theft, dressed up in legal language. Marigold's voice startled me from the doorway. "Dad, what's going on?" She stepped in, her eyes falling on the scattered documents. I lifted the page, my voice low but firm. "Look. Tell me this is my handwriting." She leaned closer, her breath catching. For a moment, she shook her head. "Cassian, he wouldn't do this. He wouldn't." I pushed the paper into her hands. "Marigold, you know me. Look at the letters. That isn't me. He's stealing from both of us." Her face paled as the truth pressed in, cracks forming in her certainty. She placed the papers down, silent, staring at the floor as if she wished it would swallow her whole. The sound of the front door opening broke the moment. Cassian's footsteps were unhurried, confident. He entered the study, eyes falling instantly on the documents. A smirk curved his mouth. "So, you found them." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, the swagger of someone who thought he had already won. "Maybe it's time you let go, old man." My jaw clenched. "You forged my name. You went behind my back. You think I'll stay quiet?" He stepped forward, his voice low, cutting. "Quiet is exactly what you'll be, because whether you like it or not, soon this house will be ours, officially." The words hung in the air, heavier than any insult before. The week crawled on like a weight pressing against my chest. Each step through my own house felt heavier. Each glance at Cassian's smug face sharper than the last. I went to my study early one morning and opened the top drawer where I had kept family documents for years. The neat stacks I remembered were gone. In their place, a few random papers sat shuffled, and others were missing altogether. My fingers ran across the wood grain where the folder of deeds had always rested, but the space was empty now. Later that day, Cassian whistled as he moved through the kitchen, balancing his phone and a mug of coffee. His words were just loud enough for me to hear. "Yeah, the bank's moving along fine. Shouldn't be long now." He looked at me as he passed, a glint of challenge in his eye, as though daring me to question what he was orchestrating. By afternoon, the unease had hardened into suspicion. I heard Marigold's voice drifting from the living room, soft and uncertain. Cassian sat beside her with a folder spread across the coffee table. "See, babe, these receipts don't lie. Your dad's been pulling out cash without telling us. Reckless amounts. It's why I had to step in. My heart dropped. I hadn't touched the bank accounts in months beyond paying the usual bills. Yet there were the papers. Neat lines of transactions scribbled with my name. Marigold bit her lip, her eyes moving between the documents and Cassian's face. Her shoulders sagged with hesitation. I lingered in the hallway, unable to stop myself from listening. Cassian leaned closer, lowering his voice in mock concern. I know it's hard to see, but he's not himself anymore. We can't risk him ruining what we're building. The words struck me harder than any blow. Marigold didn't speak, didn't defend me, only sat with a silence that cut deeper than shouting ever could. That night, the dinner table turned into another battlefield. Cassian set down his fork, leaned back, and with a casual laugh said, "Marigold, I think your dad's forgetting things more often. The bills, the appointments. I'm worried it's early dementia." The fork trembled in my hand, clinking against the plate. I looked at Marigold. She stared at her food, not at me. Rowan shifted in his high chair, wide-eyed at the tension hanging in the air. The humiliation settled like a stone in my stomach, burning hotter with every second of silence. When the meal ended, I caught Marigold in the hallway. "Sweetheart," I said softly, "don't let him twist you against me. Look at me. Do I sound like a man losing his mind?" Her lips trembled. She whispered so faintly I almost didn't catch it. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Dad." Those words hit like a hammer. It wasn't just Cassian's lies anymore. It was that seed of doubt taking root inside my daughter's heart. Later that night, as the crickets sang outside, I found an envelope slid under my door. Inside was a photograph, an image of me standing at a teller's counter, papers in hand, but the angle was strange. The timestamp blurred, and the posture wasn't quite mine. I knew in an instant. It was staged. Cassian's web of lies had grown too thick to ignore. They wanted me erased, painted as a forgetful old fool who couldn't manage his own life. I gripped the photo so tightly it crumpled in my hand. The rage that surged wasn't blind. It was sharp, deliberate. If Cassian wanted to play with lies, then I would arm myself with truth. Quietly, firmly, I whispered into the dark, "This isn't the end. It's the beginning." Cassian called for what he smugly called a family meeting. His voice carried the authority of someone who thought he already owned the ground beneath our feet. I sat in the living room, arms folded, watching him move about like a man preparing for a performance. Marigold stood at his side, her arms crossed, her eyes heavy with worry. Rowan sat quietly on the floor with a toy truck in his hand, glancing between us without saying much. And then there was Opal, our neighbor, who Cassian had invited under the pretense of being a neutral witness. The room was thick with tension before a single word was spoken. Cassian began, his tone sharp. "This can't go on forever. We all know what's happening here. Thaddeus, you're losing your grip. You forget things. You wander off in your own head. We can't keep pretending." His gaze cut into me like a blade, but his words were rehearsed, polished lies. He laid down a stack of papers, receipts, bank slips, and notes with my name scrawled across them. "Proof," he said, smirking, "that he's been pulling money without telling anyone. Proof he doesn't know what he's doing anymore." Marigold shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her hands twisted together in her lap, her lips pressed tight. She didn't leap to my defense. Instead, she looked away, and that silence was louder than anything Cassian had just said. My heart ached, not for myself, but for the daughter who once clung to me as her safe harbor. I took a deep breath, steadying the tremor that wanted to betray my anger. Slowly, I laid down my own folder. Inside, I kept a notarized copy of my signature from years ago, a legal document from when I had my will updated after my wife passed. My voice cut steady through the room. "This is my hand. This is my name. What you've brought here," I gestured at his stack of lies, "is nothing more than forged paper. You can compare the strokes yourself." Cassian scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Desperation. That's all this is. You're clinging to scraps because you can't face reality. This house isn't yours anymore. Everyone sees it but you. Marigold's eyes flickered down at the signatures, her brows pinching together. She didn't speak, but the doubt was there, creeping into the corners of her loyalty. And then it happened, small, quiet, almost dismissed at first. Rowan, fiddling with his crayons, mumbled, "Daddy, study, night." His little voice cut through the air like a bell. He scribbled a rough drawing on his paper, lines jagged but clear enough. A man standing near the door of my study with a rectangle that looked like papers in his hand. Marigold froze. She looked at the drawing, then at me. The color drained from her face. Cassian shot up, red flushing across his cheeks. "He's a child!" His voice cracked with sudden rage, but it was too late. The innocence of a child had pierced through what all my words could not. The silence was broken by the scrape of a chair. Opal stood, calm but firm, holding a thick folder against her chest. "Maybe it's time everyone sees what I found." Her voice was steady, her eyes locked on Cassian. He spun toward her, fury barely contained. "You don't belong in this. Stay out of it." Opal didn't flinch. She stepped forward and laid the folder on the table, her hand resting on it with deliberate weight. "These papers tell a very different story," she said, her gaze unwavering. Cassian's smirk faltered for the first time. Marigold's breath caught in her throat. Rowan's little drawing lay between us all like a candle in the dark, exposing everything that had been hidden. And me, I leaned forward, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. The storm was far from over, but for once, the wind wasn't at Cassian's back. Opal's hands moved with deliberate care as she spread the folder across the table. The papers inside looked official, stamped, signed, undeniable. My heart pounded as the room quieted, every breath caught in the air. Cassian's face darkened, the color rushing to his cheeks. "These are nothing," he snapped, his voice sharp. "Fabricated, probably dug up by a bored neighbor who doesn't understand how things work." But no one laughed with him this time. Even Marigold's eyes stayed fixed on the documents, her silence heavier than words. The proof was right there in black ink, and for once, Cassian's slick grin faltered. I straightened in my chair, my palms pressed flat on the table. I've lived under this roof for decades, built it with my own two hands alongside my late wife. Everything I ever worked for is tied into these walls. And these papers, I tapped the spread of notarized letters. They prove what I've been saying all along. Rowan's small hand slipped into mine, his grip steady despite the tension. He whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Don't give up, Grandpa." The words, so soft, carried more strength than any argument Cassian had ever thrown at me. My chest ached with both pride and sorrow. Marigold's lips trembled before she finally found her voice. "Cassian," she said, her tone low but shaking. "Did you forge my father's name?" The question cut the air sharper than a blade. Cassian recoiled as if struck, then slammed his fist against the arm of his chair. "How dare you ask me that? After everything I've done for this family, for you." His voice cracked, not from grief but fury. "You'd believe him over me?" Her face paled, torn between the husband she'd chosen and the father who had raised her. The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Then Cassian's anger turned on me. He leaned forward, his eyes burning with venom. "This is what he wanted all along, to pit us against each other. He's senile, can't even keep his stories straight. He's playing you, Marigold." Before Marigold could answer, Opal's steady voice cut through the storm. "Enough!" She laid one final paper on the table. "I've already filed a report with the bank and the county. The authorities know about the forged signatures. These aren't just family squabbles anymore. They're crimes." Cassian froze. His mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time since this battle began, his arrogance cracked, replaced with a flicker of fear. Rowan shifted closer to me, his small body pressed against my side. Marigold covered her mouth with her hand, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Then, with a violent shove of his chair, Cassian stood. "This isn't over," his voice thundered through the room. "You think you've won, old man? You haven't seen anything yet." He stormed out, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the windows. The echo of his footsteps faded, leaving only Marigold's quiet sobs. She sank into her chair, head bowed, torn apart by guilt and disbelief. My heart twisted for her. Even in my own vindication, winning the truth meant watching my daughter's world unravel. I sat back, weary but resolute. The papers had spoken for me when my voice alone hadn't been enough. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small measure of ground beneath my feet. But the relief didn't last long. The phone rang, slicing through the silence. I reached for it, my fingers stiff with dread. "Mr. Wren?" The voice was calm, unfamiliar, professional. "This is the county clerk's office. We need to speak with you about your will." My blood ran cold. "What about it?" My voice rasped, though I already knew I wouldn't like the answer. "It appears someone has been attempting to alter it. We thought you should be aware." The room spun, the weight of those words pressing heavier than any burden before. Cassian's storm hadn't passed. It had only shifted. The clerk's office in Asheville smelled faintly of paper and polish, a mixture that clung to my nerves. Sitting across the wide desk, the county clerk slid a thick folder toward me, with a look that was both cautious and apologetic. "Mr. Wren," she began softly, "someone attempted to file changes to your will. These documents suggest you've transferred your estate, your home included, to your son-in-law." Her words struck like a hammer. My hands, aged and weathered from years of work, hovered over the folder, trembling not from frailty but from fury barely contained. Inside were copies of forms, each line filled with my supposed handwriting, my supposed signature. I stared at them as if they were taunting me, daring me to deny my own name. But I knew that stroke of ink, that slant, that false flourish at the end. It wasn't mine. Fear and indignation churned together. The idea that Cassian hadn't just invaded my home but had reached for the very legacy I built with my late wife. It made my chest tighten as if grief itself had returned. Stepping outside the courthouse, the late afternoon light seemed sharper, unforgiving. My gaze was fixed on those papers clutched against me. How many signs had I brushed aside, calling them stress or household squabbles, Cassian lingering near my study desk, Marigold's silence when questions were raised, the sudden changes in how mail was handled. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was premeditated theft, not just of property, but of memory, of identity, of the promise that my name would mean something to those I leave behind. A voice pulled me back. "Thad?" I turned to see Harold, leaning on his cane but carrying the same sharp eyes he had in his lawyering days. We hadn't spoken in months, maybe longer, but his presence now felt almost faded. "You look like you've been run through the ringer," he said, studying me. "I've heard things. Cassian's been sniffing around records, asking the wrong questions in the wrong places. Thought you should know." Relief hit me like a crack in a dam. "So it wasn't just me imagining?" Harold shook his head. "No, old friend, he's got a plan, and it's bigger than just bending the rules. But if you're willing, I can help gather what we need, legally, thoroughly." For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground shift slightly under my favor. Back home. Silence wrapped the house in a suffocating blanket. Each corner whispered with memories, the banister my wife polished until it gleamed, the porch where we shared coffee every sunrise. Now shadows clung there instead, echoes of laughter drowned by tension. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. Marigold's voice was unsteady. "Dad, is it true? Did you really sign the will over to Cassian?" I gripped the receiver, staring at the photos on the wall, the one where she was a girl on my shoulders, eyes wide with trust. My throat tightened. "When did you stop trusting me, daughter?" I asked gently. Her silence stretched long, a wound deeper than words. She didn't answer, only sighed, the sound heavy with doubt and distance. Before the line went dead, the ache burrowed deep, but before despair could consume me, Rowan's small footsteps came down the hall. He stood at the doorway, eyes firm in a way no child his age should have to bear. "I believe you, Grandpa," he said, voice steady. "No matter what they say." Those words, fragile yet unshakable, rekindled something inside me. That night, by lamplight, I opened my old journal. The ink bled slowly as I wrote. I gave them my years, and now they take even the promise of my absence. The phone rang again. Harold's voice was urgent. "Thad, sit down. Cassian just filed something new today at the courthouse." My grip tightened on the receiver. "What did he do now?" There was a pause. Then Harold's words cut clean and merciless. "He's filed a power of attorney claim, under your name." The phone shook in my hand as the truth settled like ice in my veins. This wasn't just about my house anymore. It was about my voice, my right to exist as myself. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a place where lives were judged not by warmth but by ink and evidence. Harold walked beside me, steady and calm, his hand briefly tapping my shoulder before we entered. His silence said enough. Be prepared. Inside, the benches creaked as people shifted. Cassian sat upright, his hair combed too perfectly, his tie sharp, his eyes brimming with confidence. He looked the part of a devoted son-in-law, the savior of a stumbling old man. My chest tightened with a mix of dread and defiance. The judge's gavel tapped once, echoing like thunder. "This hearing concerns the contested petition of power of attorney regarding Mr. Thaddeus Wren." My stomach dropped. Power of attorney. My very voice was at stake. Harold leaned forward, whispering, "Hold steady." Cassian was called first. He stood with practiced humility, voice thick with false concern. "Your Honor, my father-in-law has been struggling. He forgets bills, repeats questions, misplaces important papers. I've taken on responsibilities, but it's too much for one household to handle without legal clarity." A murmur ran through the courtroom. His lies slid across the room like oil. Harold stood. "Your Honor, my client has lived independently, paying every bill on time, maintaining his affairs, and," Cassian cut in smoothly, holding up papers. "Then why do we have these receipts, withdrawals, inconsistent signatures, evidence of confusion?" The judge peered at them. I recognized the forged marks, twisted imitations of my hand. My throat burned, but I forced my gaze to stay steady. Then came the dagger. Marigold was called to the stand. She moved slowly, hands clasped, eyes heavy. For a moment, I prayed she would glance at me with the warmth of the daughter I raised. "Mrs. Alden," the clerk said, "do you believe your father is capable of managing his affairs?" Her lips trembled, but her voice was clear. "My father? He's been confused lately. He clings to the house, but it's hard to deny. He forgets things. I think Cassian only wants what's best." Each word fell like a stone against my chest. The courtroom blurred. My daughter, the baby I once carried through storms, had just placed her hand in the fire that would consume me. The judge nodded gravely, jotting notes. Cassian's smile was subtle but triumphant. Harold whispered, "Don't break, Thad, not yet." I swallowed grief like bile. My voice cracked as I whispered, "Marigold," but she avoided my eyes. The hearing seemed all but lost. And then, Rowan. His voice broke through, high and nervous. "Excuse me, Your Honor." The judge frowned. "You are?" "Rowan Wren," he said, stepping forward, clutching something in his trembling hands. I live in the house too, and I have something to show." Cassian hissed, "Sit down, boy." But Rowan's hands didn't shake as much as I expected. He pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. The room filled with Cassian's own voice. "Don't worry, Marigold, he's too old to fight. I'll forge what I need. By the time he notices, the house will be ours." Gasps swept across the benches. The judge raised a hand for silence. Cassian's face drained of color, his smooth mask cracking in front of everyone. Harold seized the moment. "Your Honor, this evidence directly contradicts Mr. Alden's testimony and proves malicious intent." The judge's gavel slammed. "We will recess for verification." As the room emptied, I sat frozen. Rowan came to my side, eyes wide but steady. "Grandpa, I couldn't let him erase you." My throat closed, tears pricking at the edges of vision. I placed a hand on his shoulder, words failing me. Hours later, dusk wrapped around my porch. The cicadas sang, and for once, I didn't feel alone. Rowan sat beside me, awkward. Still a boy, but braver than most men. "You saved me," I murmured. He shook his head. "You saved me first. I just gave something back." We sat in silence until Harold's call came, sharp and urgent. "Thad, brace yourself. Tomorrow will be the real fight. Cassian won't stop here." I ended the call and looked at Rowan's determined face, the faintest ember of loyalty rekindling, but Harold's warning sat heavy in my chest. This was far from over. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall courthouse windows, casting long streaks across the polished wood. The room felt heavier than any battlefield I had ever walked into, though this one bore no rifles, only papers, voices, and the weight of truth. My palms rested on the table in front of me, steady. For months, I had endured slights, whispers, and thefts under my own roof. Today, that silence ended. Rowan sat 2 seats away, his shoulders tight, but his eyes fixed on me with a resolve I hadn't seen in a child so young. Cassian leaned back smugly at first, dressed sharper than usual, his lawyer whispering in his ear. He thought he had already won. But I had come with Harold at my side, and Harold's eyes carried the quiet fire of a man ready to strip lies down to their bones. The clerk called the case forward, and I rose slowly, carrying 72 years of life with me, but no hint of weakness in my step. The first strike came when Harold played the recording in full. Cassian's voice filled the courtroom, sharp and cruel, gloating about bleeding the old man dry and laughing at Marigold's blind loyalty. A gasp rippled through the benches. Even the judge's eyes narrowed. Cassian shot up, stammering, insisting it was fabricated, but the judge raised a hand. Silence. For the first time in this long war, it was his lies that trembled, not my truth. I looked toward Marigold. Her face had drained of color, and the ring she fiddled with shook in her hand. For a second, our eyes met, and she looked away, unable to bear it. The daughter I had raised, who once clung to my knees at night when storms rattled the windows, now sat among strangers, ashamed of the man she had chosen over her father. When the time came for me to speak, I did not rise in anger. I spoke with the steady tone of memory. I told the judge of a house built brick by brick with my wife, of bills paid faithfully for decades, of Christmas mornings where that same living room had been filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and the laughter of children. I reminded them that the papers Cassian waved around were lies, but the walls of my home still carried the truth of a life lived and given freely to my family. The gavel struck after what felt like an eternity. The judge's voice was firm. Cassian barred from the property, the forgery exposed, and my rights restored. The house, my dignity, and my name would remain intact. My chest tightened, not in pain but in vindication. For months, I had been treated as a ghost in my own life, and now the law itself declared otherwise. Marigold wept quietly in the back. When court adjourned, she approached with trembling steps. "Dad, Her voice cracked. I could have turned away. Part of me wanted to. Instead, I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are my daughter. Nothing will change that. But your husband will never set foot in my home again. Mercy for her. A wall for him." That was the line I drew. Cassian stormed past us, humiliated, muttering curses under his breath. The weight of his defeat hung in the air. He had tried to erase me, and instead, he erased himself. By evening, I sat once more on my porch, the same boards that had borne my silent fury for months. But tonight, silence was not weakness, it was peace. Rowan came carrying a folded quilt, one his grandmother had made long ago, its seams frayed but its warmth still intact. He draped it across my knees and said softly, "Grandpa, This house feels right again. The night air smelled of pine, the cicadas humming steady in the background. I leaned back and breathed deep, letting the weight of years ease from my shoulders. Family, I realized, is fragile. It can be poisoned, broken, even lost, but it can also be reforged. Rowan's hand in mine was proof enough of that. The house was mine again. But more than that, I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity. Some ties were broken forever, but others had been reforged in fire. And that, I realized, was enough.